I woke up with a chill down my spine, something I had never felt before. My eyes slowly opened, and the first thing I saw was the white, sterile ceiling of an unfamiliar place. I tried to move, but my body was stiff, heavy, as if it no longer responded to my commands. A sharp pain shot through my head, and suddenly, I remembered the car accident. The last thing I recalled was the sound of screeching tires and the brutal impact against something. Everything after that became a blur. As my vision adjusted, I realized I was lying on some kind of metal gurney. The strong smell of chemicals and the echo of silence made me understand where I was, a morgue. My heart should have been racing, but something was wrong. I couldn't feel a heartbeat. Panic set in, and when I looked down at my chest, a horrifying truth began to form. I was dead, or at least, I should have been. Forcing my body to move, I managed to sit up on the gurney. The room around me was dim, with flickering cold lights over rows of metal drawers that I knew contained bodies. My thoughts were foggy, but something inside me screamed that I was no longer human. An unbearable thirst, unlike anything I'd ever felt before, began to grow. It was primal, almost beastly. I needed blood. I wandered through the morgue, trying to understand what was happening to me. Every step was like learning to walk again, yet at the same time, there was a strength I never had before. My hands trembled, and when I touched my own skin, I realized it was cold, hard as marble. The panic grew when I saw my reflection in a broken piece of glass on the floor. My eyes, once brown, were now blood red. I tried to scream, but my voice came out hoarse, almost like a growl. It was as if I was battling something inside of me, a beast that wanted to take control, the morgue, the lack of a heartbeat, the unbearable thirst burning within me. It all made sense now. I was a vampire, a creature of the night, and that realization hit me like a punch to the gut. There was no time to think. I had to get out of there. My instincts, now heightened, led me to the exit door, but it was locked. I yanked the handle with such force that the metal bent in my hands. I felt the power surging through my veins, something I had never experienced before. It was terrifying and, at the same time, intoxicating. When I finally left the morgue, the darkness of the night engulfed me. The streets were deserted, and the full moon hung in the sky, casting everything in a pale light. Every sound, every movement was amplified for me, as if the entire world was screaming. The thirst for blood was growing, dominating my thoughts, and I knew I couldn't resist much longer. I remembered a small convenience store a few blocks away. People were inside their homes, living their normal lives, unaware of the monster now walking among them. As I entered the store, the jingling bell above the door sounded like a scream of alarm in my ears. The cashier looked at me with a suspicious expression, and when he opened his mouth to say something, all I could hear was the pulse of the blood in his veins. It happened too fast. In an instant, I was on the other side of the counter, my hands around his throat. His eyes were wide with fear, but I had no control anymore. The smell of blood was unbearable, and when I bit into his flesh, the metallic taste filled my mouth. It was as if every cell in my body was starving for it. When I was done, I let his body drop to the floor with a dull thud. The horror of what I had done hit me, but it was too late. The beast inside me was awake, and there was no putting it back in its cage. I was a killer now, a predator, and this was my new reality. I fled the scene, leaving the lifeless body of the cashier behind. I ran through the empty streets, aimless, trying to escape the truth of what I had become. But there was nowhere to go, no place where I could hide from myself. The city felt different now, full of shadows and dangers I had never noticed before. The following days were a blur. I hid during the day, avoiding the sun like a plague, and at night, I went out hunting, trying to quench the insatiable thirst. The guilt and horror of what I was doing never went away, but the need for blood was stronger than any human feeling. Every night was a battle against the monster inside me, a battle I knew I was losing. I was changing, slowly losing what was left of my humanity. The memories of my previous life began to fade, replaced by survival instincts. Time no longer meant anything to me. The days and nights blurred together, and I became more and more the creature I feared. One day, while hunting in the streets, I saw someone who recognized me. A childhood friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. He called my name, but all I felt was hunger. There was no connection anymore, just the desire to feed. I attacked him without thinking twice, ignoring his screams of surprise and horror. When I finished, I felt something break inside me. The last link to my past had been destroyed, and all that remained was emptiness. I was no longer who I used to be, and any hope of redemption had vanished with my friend's blood. I was a creature of the night, and there was no turning back. The human world became distant, an echo of something I could no longer reach. I started avoiding people, hunting in the shadows, a specter haunting the city. My body was changing, adapting to the new reality, and with each passing day, I felt less and less human. I began to wander aimlessly through the empty streets. What was I now? A monster, a freak of nature. And worst of all, I had no choice. The hunger, the need for blood, dominated every thought, every action. I was condemned to a life of darkness and death. Eventually, I found others like me. Vampires hiding in the shadows, living on the fringes of society. They took me in, taught me how to control my thirst, but the guilt never went away. I became part of a world I never wanted to know, a world where blood was the only currency. But even among vampires, I was different. I didn't want to be one of them, didn't want to live this life. The memory of what I had lost haunted me, and the guilt of every life I took weighed heavily on my soul. I was a prisoner of my own existence, doomed to wander the night forever. Time passed, and I learned to survive, but never to live. With every sunset, the beast inside me awoke, and the battle began again. I was a vampire, but not by choice. And every night, I wondered how much longer I could resist before losing what was left of me. The city changed, but my curse remained. I was a monster, doomed to walk the earth for eternity, always searching for blood, but always tormented by the guilt of what I had become. And so, the night continued, without end, without hope, without redemption. And in the end, all that was left was darkness. The early morning was cold, shrouded in thick fog that covered the city streets like a ghostly blanket. I walked, aimlessly, as I did every night, looking for something to quench the unbearable thirst. The darkness was my ally, but that night, I felt something different. I was exhausted, as if eternity was slowly crushing me. When I saw the silhouette of a homeless woman curled up on the ground, my thirst came roaring back, and my instincts took over. I approached slowly, ready to attack. When my eyes met the woman's face, something paralyzed my body. Her features were familiar, the look lost in fear. Suddenly, I saw in her someone from my past. A confusing memory. My feet froze to the ground, and the roaring thirst went silent. My eyes locked onto hers, and my heart, which hadn't beat in so long, almost managed to fool me into thinking it still existed. She muttered something, her trembling voice barely audible through the thick fog. "Leave me," she begged, her voice muffled by fear. But I was lost in my own thoughts. Her face, illuminated by the faint light of a street lamp, brought back a memory I thought I had buried. She resembled someone. My mother. The face, the eyes, the shock made me recoil. Anguish took hold of me. Who had I become? What had I done with my humanity? I was about to take the life of an innocent woman, someone who, at another time, could have been the person who gave me life. Despair consumed me in a way I hadn't felt since my transformation. Memories began to surface, fragmented and painful, as if someone were pulling them out of the depths of my being. I saw flashes of my life before all this. I was just a child running in a blooming garden, my mother smiling in the distance. The sun illuminated everything gently, warmly. The heat of that scene enveloped me for a moment, and I felt a pang of nostalgia, a longing for something I knew I'd never have again. That day, I was happy, completely carefree. The sun was the center of everything, a vital force that was now denied to me. I looked at the woman again, now huddled, trembling from cold and fear on the damp ground. What was I doing? I knew the answer. I couldn't keep living like this. It was a miserable existence, full of pain, guilt, and darkness. I needed to see the sun again, to feel its warmth on my face, even if only for a brief moment. I knew what that meant. I knew the sun would be my end. But it didn't matter anymore. I no longer wanted this life of shadows. I didn't want to be a creature of the night, a bloodthirsty beast that hunted the living. I slowly backed away, leaving the woman behind as the chaos in my mind began to calm down. I walked up to a hill where I knew I'd have a clear view of the sunrise. The sky was starting to brighten, with faint traces of pink and orange, signaling that the sun would soon rise on the horizon. I sat down on the grass, waiting for the inevitable. The memories kept flowing, clearer each time, but at the same time distant, like a life that belonged to someone else. The first ray of sunlight broke through the horizon, and I felt the warmth touch my skin. I closed my eyes, letting the light envelop me, slowly burning my flesh, but bringing a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. And, for the first time since becoming a vampire, I smiled.